Hey everybody, it's James Lindsay. You are listening to New Discourses Bullets, where I give a short bullet point-like summary of a topic related to woke that we need to understand so we can beat it. And I want to talk about the three pillars that hold up our society. A lot of times you've probably heard, you need at least three legs to the stool. A two-legged stool won't stand. A functioning society has to have three pillars, at least. It could have more, but I think there are three very fundamental ones, and I just want to give a short argument for what they are and why they matter. And those three pillars, for a long time I thought there were just two, but I finally figured out, actually in the wake of Charlie Kirk's murder and seeing the outpouring from that and the transformation of our society that's actually kind of organically happening because of it, I realized what the third one is. And I'm very happy to feel a more complete argument because I knew the other part wasn't. So the three pillars, I think, of a functioning civilization or society are truth, justice, and love. And I just want to break these down very quickly. Truth is obviously the most important. Truth is like the rock, right? If you want to be running a society, even on just like a very simplest of society, out of alignment with the truth, eventually the truth is going to catch up to you. You can't evade the truth forever. The truth, if you are wrong about it, will eventually teach you some kind of an important lesson. I mean, it's very easy to come up with simple and silly examples, like if you believe for whatever reason that you're invincible by some magic ritual that you did, and you decide to wander around in a war zone and bombs are going off, and you catch some flack. Guess what? You're going to be injured and probably paralyzed or killed. And that's not, by the way, an idle example. That's what the pagan, weirdo, wizard, fascist, traditionalist philosopher Julius Evola actually did during World War II. He believed that his wizardry would protect him from physically from harm, and that he had done the proper magic or incantations or whatever it was that he was supposed to do, and wandered around in a bomb raid and caught shrapnel and ended up paralyzed for the rest of his life. True story. Probably don't listen to fascist wizards or take them that seriously, who are also unabashedly pagan and whatever. But the point is, here he was out of step with the truth, and what happened to him was catastrophic. And there is no avoiding reality when it arrives. You might think that you're invincible, you might think that you're smarter than the situation, but the truth of the situation is going to catch up to you eventually. There's an old saying that reality is the thing you run into when your beliefs are false. There's another one that reality bats last. I've used both of these. I've actually given them in speeches that I've done about woke, all the way back to the first major one that I ever gave in 2019 in London. One of my entire talks was about reality being the thing you run into when your beliefs are false, out of the two that I gave at that conference. And so it's a very important idea. So if we're going to build society, we have to build it on truth. Of course, in the West, we enable people to have freedom, especially economic freedom or freedom of their possessions. We call it private property. We have secured private property because actually, as it turns out, the idea of what's usually called, or the idea of free enterprise, it gets called capitalism a lot, is that it's basically a truth generating engine. You make something, and if it's true that it is of use to somebody else or of value to somebody else, they will part with their hard-earned resources in order to get it. And so you have this pretty strong tool driving you toward truth. The government doesn't have any real incentive to go toward truth. It has incentives to maintain its own power, or actually it's more accurate not to talk about the government as an entity even at all, although it does tend to act that way sometimes. Individuals in the government have no incentive toward truth. That's just a matter of their level of personal responsibility. They have an incentive toward keeping their power. The problem for the public sector is that incentive is not there, but that incentive is there in the private sector. Even if it's not the only incentive, there are competing incentives. But if you're doing things falsely, eventually you're going to get out-competed by somebody who's doing something more truly than you are. And so truth is very, very important if we want productivity, if we want abundance, if we want to just have subsistence, we want to just barely make ends meet. There's only one way to do that, is by being in alignment with truth. You get out of alignment with truth too far, and people aren't going to have enough to eat, or you're not going to be able to distribute the resources. And we could go into a whole long, discussion like Milton Friedman about how capitalism or free enterprise achieves those things, but that's not the point. One of the key pillars is truth. And the hard fact about the truth is that it is to most individuals personal advantage to skirt the truth or to lie in many cases. And so the fight for the truth is a difficult fight, it is a dangerous fight, and it is a never-ending fight. So long as there are incentives for human beings to tell falsehoods in order to gain momentary personal advantage, there will be a fight for the truth. As I went in Canada one time, I was with this woman, Amy Ham, who's being persecuted for standing up for not even what she is now, but at the time she was just being very plain spoken about the transition issue and was refusing to acknowledge that this false idea that men can become women and women can become men. And now she's under all this persecution from the Nurses Guild and the Canadian government even, and all of this, fined all kinds of money, lost her license, I think, and something, I don't know the story, but it's very bad. And so she's up there, giving a speech and starts off by saying, a lot of people accuse me of being a grifter, that I'm doing this for attention. But let me just tell you, and I thought this was profound, she said, if there was a profit motive for telling the truth or defending the truth, nobody would have to do it. Everybody would do that because the profit motive would take care of it. So there would be no need to stand up and tell the truth on purpose. There'd be no need to stand up and I think she was actually said to engage in, to defend free speech. If there was a profit incentive to defend free speech, then nobody would have to do it. And she had a pretty solid point there, right? But the truth is actually what we're seeking through this idea of free speech, because we can each criticize bad ideas when they arise. That's what freedom of speech is actually about. It's not about being able to say your ideas that might be right. It's about each of us being able to point out when somebody else's ideas or even our own might have been wrong. And that is much more dangerous. It is very dangerous to tell somebody whose career or livelihood or status or monarchy depends on lies. It's very dangerous to tell the truth around such a person. So truth, it turns out, becomes one of the pillars of society, and it's always something we have to fight for. But if we're not building on truth, falsehood will catch up to us. This is what sank the Soviet Union. Maybe this was a better example. Why did the Chernobyl reactor melt down in the Soviet Union? Was it because the Russians didn't know how to manage things, or the poor quality? Was it just communism sucks? No, it actually turns out that people knew things were going wrong, and things probably could have been changed that might have averted some of or all of the disaster. But nobody was allowed to tell anybody that things were going wrong, because anybody who admitted that things were going wrong was going to get blamed for causing problems and for revealing that things were going wrong. So you had this structure of silence and lies that eventually caught up with them. And the same thing happens in every communist regime under every circumstance. The Great Leap Forward in China happened under Mao because people were incentivized to lie about the amount of grain they were able to produce in order to make the government happy, and the amount of steel they were able to produce. And then they tried to meet these impossible quotas, literally 5-10 times the possible limits of what they could have done, that they then bragged and said they were not just able to achieve, but were achieving, even though they weren't. So then they had to just webs and webs of lies flew out to try to cover up the fact that this wasn't happening, including from the Chinese government itself. The People's Republic was trying to prove to the world that the Great Leap Forward was working, a lie, by taking these inflated numbers and exporting huge amounts of goods, grain and somewhat steel, that they didn't even have, to the point where literally maybe 100 million people starved or died of exposure when the winter of 1961 hit. So it was a complete disaster, absolute catastrophe, and it was built on the fact that if your society is not oriented toward truth, your society is in big trouble. Okay, now what about justice? Justice is the second pillar. What is justice? Justice is, very simply, it is when it's actually also the extension of this idea of equity in its real meaning, the biblical meaning, the true meaning of the word equity, which is that people get some reasonable approximation of that which they deserve, and they do not get what they do not deserve. All of that, of course, is to reasonable approximations. So people get what they deserve and do not get what they do not deserve is justice. So if your society is not based on justice, and no communist or fascist society is based on justice, by the way, and mob justice isn't justice, it's vigilantism and other terrible things. If your society is not based on justice, you have a society that is unfair, and people will notice, and it will start to come apart. Okay, so in the communist societies, people would destroy their own things because rather than collectivize them, like their farms, their tools, their animals, sometimes their own children, rather than allow them to be collectivized by the communist government, because it was unjust that they would have to take what they had worked so hard for and then share it with others. Most socialist experiments collapse, even when they're tight-knit groups or tight-knit religious groups or, ethnically monocultural and, again, in small groups, because you always have this problem that some people work harder, produce more, and other people work less, produce less. And you have this, it's not because of a lack of talent, right, or variation in talent. A lot of people will tolerate a lot of variation in talent and therefore output. What it is because some people are loafers and people figure it out. People are free riders in the economic language. And the free rider problem is extremely significant. A free rider is somebody who's riding off of the community for free. They're leeches, they're parasites, they cost the community. And the problem is it's not fair, and people notice it's not fair. So the people who are working really hard, which turns out to usually be about 20% of the people are working hard, and 4 or 5% of the population is working really hard, are now subsidizing the other 80%, maybe as many as half of whom are not working much at all under a system where there's guaranteed redistribution. Experiment after experiment, whether it's socialist societies, communist states, or in the case of the Universal Basic Income, UBI, the literal experiments they've done with this have shown that this result happens every time. This is how humans work. And so what happens is the low end isn't producing much of anything, but they're subsidized, so they're actually discouraged from producing the little bit that they would have anyway, the low end in work ethic and motivation. The high end, on the other hand, sooner or later gets sick of this arrangement and refuses to participate. If you were ever in a group project at school and you had 4 kids in your group and you realized one kid did all the work, 2 kids did something, helpful, pretty much a little bit helpful and, accessory, and then one kid just didn't do anything, or sometimes 2 kids just didn't do anything, that the person who was doing all the work wanted to get their good grade, so they did all the work, and they were super pissed off about the whole experience and the other kids, in particular the ones who wouldn't do anything that they were having to carry. And then they were super pissed off when the other kid got a good grade they didn't actually earn. And this mentality eventually arises. The only way to keep that mentality at bay is through actual justice. Now, earlier I also said that vigilantism, mob revolt, or I'm trying to think of the word to not say mob justice because it's injustice. When the mob decides it's going to go get justice, why that happens is because the justice system's not taking care of the justice thing. The whole point in these liberal societies that everybody thinks are so bad now is that the idea of justice is going to be outsourced to a as impartial as possible third party. So when the government, who is given the monopoly of force, decides that what it's going to do is administer a 2-tiered system of justice like we see in so many countries now under the doctrine of liberating tolerance, which came from the critical theorist Herbert Marcuse. It's a Marxist, deliberate, left-advantaged stratification of society. It's a friend-enemy distinction applied to society. Well, once the government or whoever can administer justice, which is primarily the government, starts giving 2-tiered justice, people get mad and they start looking for real justice, real equity, rather than the fake redistributed kind the government's doing. Now you have a real problem on your hands. So if you don't have some strong semblance of justice and the appearance of a functioning system to deliver justice to a society, that society is virtually guaranteed to collapse. So the 2 pillars of truth and justice are absolutely crucial if you want to have a good, productive, steady, reliable, predictable, able to weather storms system. It needs to be aligned with truth. And if you want it to be able to continue functioning for very long, it better be aligned with justice. And you'd better have a system for finding truth and for finding justice that people find reliable. A lot of the problem that we're in right now is that we don't have that system at the level where it's trustworthy to enough people. So people are very unsure of how to tell when something's true, and they're very unsure that the system is just and going to treat them fairly, and not to mention keep them safe. Or then, I mean, those go hand in hand. Security often comes from people understanding that if they do crime, that there will be justice served against them. That's called deterrence. It is a part of the formula. The left, of course, pretends not to believe in deterrence. What they want is a chaotic society. I guarantee you, if they truly take power, there will be lots of deterrence. You went through a lot of deterrence to your beliefs and your views during COVID, through the racial justice riots, and so on. You saw the whole thing. You lived through it. They're all about deterrence. It's just a lie when they want to do this. They just want criminals to be able to run wild to justify their policies. But I'm digressing. So truth is a pillar, justice is a pillar, but there's another pillar. And that third leg of the stool for a functioning society is love. And this is a weird one, right? And it's really interesting because, this is in a way why Christianity is such a key foundation to civilization, but also Judaism is such a key foundation to civilization. But Christianity, really in particular, like Jesus's message is very profound and weird. It's like, don't hate your enemies, love them. Don't answer evil with evil, but bless. Turn the other cheek. Dying on the cross, Father, forgive them, they know not what they do. This is a radical message. I tell you, most people hate their enemies, and I tell you to love them. Like, this is profound stuff, right? So this is this idea that you can take the approach to truth and you can take the approach to justice in a lot of different ways. You can try to have a very harsh approach to truth and justice. You could have a very soft approach to truth and justice. You have a lot of different approaches, but in one sense, you can have a approach that is guided by this idea of not necessarily like some hippy-dippy love, but this idea that you want other people in your society generally to succeed, or you can have this idea that you generally see other people as threats and enemies, and that enmity. So when I say love here, I don't mean some goofy hippy-dippy thing. I mean this idea of general positive sentiment versus general enmity. And enmity in a society kind of comes to its peak in this concept that comes from a philosopher named Carl Schmitt, who was a Nazi. Everybody gets mad when you point out that he was a Nazi, saying that's not fair, it's a genetic fallacy, you can't say that his ideas are wrong because he was a Nazi. There's a lot of deep argument to be made there. The fact of the matter is his ideas were used to justify the Nazi totalitarian state and to build its structure the way that Hitler wanted it to, and the guy was actually a Nazi, but that's not why he's wrong. So he has this concept called the friend-enemy distinction in politics. You're hearing a lot about it lately if you're engaged in these online discussions in conservative and right-wing spaces. A lot of people are pushing the friend-enemy distinction. The left is the enemy, the right is the friends, and we're going to work together to defeat our common enemy. You're hearing this a lot. This logic is the logic of enmity, not love. And if you say something like this isn't the good way to go, what they'll say is, oh, James or you or whoever just wants us to roll over and die. He doesn't want us to fight. He wants us to go into unity with people who want us dead or who hate us or whatever else. And no, that's not actually true. There's every space in the world, truth and justice still matter. People who are wrongdoers still need to be caught out and brought to justice. But the spirit in which that is done is absolutely crucial. We bring justice upon wrongdoers because we love our fellows, and it's a nasty but important business, not because we like to do it, right? That's how justice kind of has to work. We serve justice as blindly as we can because we don't know the facts until there's been a trial, and we don't judge the facts ahead of time based on who somebody happens to be, even politically, but also racially and so on. That's blind justice. Is very important. So if we don't have this spirit of love as opposed to the spirit of enmity, then we have a negative sum approach to how we're doing society. And that negative sum approach to how we're doing society is going to hurt society. It's negative sum, which means the more you play, the less you have. Positive sum means the more you play, the more everybody grows. We want to be in that situation. And this is where this love your enemies, forgive your enemies, so-called Christian nonsense, as some people would see it, is not weakness, but rather profound strength. And this is where the third pillar of society is if you don't want the idea to be that the third pillar of society is love, if you think that's too much for that you have to be the firm character, I want you to think of the firm and maybe furious father and how he's dealing with his children. He doesn't lose sight of the love for them. And if he does, we see him as an abuser and a problem, right? The idea is that he's going to do what he's going to do, which might be a nasty business of truth or justice assertion, firmly, but with an underlying spirit of love. If we step into the space of enmity, mutual enmity, which is the basis of Schmidt's friend-enemy distinction, in his own words, what we will end up in is, at best, an eye for an eye society, and at worst, something much, much crueler. This isn't to talk about all the different problems with that distinction, but what happens is when you take a common enemy, you will tolerate bad friends. The enemy of my enemy is my friend is kind of dangerous logic. You will end up with bad friends. There are other aspects. People who are insufficiently pure in their stand with you will eventually get named enemies and purged. It's the logic of totalitarianism, but it's also the opposite of the constructive stance that we have to take, especially with regard to how we pursue and share truth and justice. We don't go, if we want people to know the truth, we can't go beat them over the head with the truth. We can't go threaten them into believing the truth. We have to beseech them to believe the truth, offer them the truth, tell them the truth, show them why following and adhering to the truth is going to give them better results. We have to make the case for the truth, and we invite them to do so, because when they live in the truth for themselves, they act in accordance with the truth, as opposed to acting as a whipped cur who's acting at the fear of the end of a stick or a leash or a whip. So it's a completely different mindset. The same is true with justice. If we are acting in enmity, we become cruel. We are no longer building a functional society. We're building a terror regime. That's why I said it's the logic of totalitarianism. It is absolutely crucial that we use all three of these pillars. And enmity is the opposite of love here. And enmity is the wrong model for how we're going to pursue and enforce and share truth and justice. So these three become the pillars for society. I hope that we can think a lot about this and try to go forth in our lives in a way where those three things become the things that we cleave to. And then what we do is basically the people who are willing to start trying to get it on the outside of, say, the woke monster, we bring them on board, and then we bring the next layer, and we bring the next layer. Think of it like, peeling an onion. We're going to get one layer at a time, and maybe we're never going to get the hardened radicals in the middle, and that doesn't matter. The goal for that is to marginalize their influence by taking away their basis of support, by showing the basis of support that there is a better way, and that the radicalism is not going to solve their problems. Mutual enmity is not going to solve their problems. A biased, not just system is not going to solve their problems, and an ideology that favors its visions, maybe they're idealistic or whatever, of society over the truth, is not going to solve their problems. Thank you for listening. I can't wait to bring you another episode soon.